Hey guys, today I'm going to be painting the Spearmaiden Cyclops from Massive Darkness. Here I'm just trying some hot water to fix a kind of bent javelin spear thing. So I don't know if it's a gravity thing or what. It probably is, but this is a pretty thick piece of plastic, and so the hot water trick can only kind of do so much to really course correct it. Otherwise, we'd just be able to stick them in hot water and mold them like clay. But I think it did help. Check out my unboxing of this unit to see the actual, like how bent it was at the start. I'll link to that in the description below, so you can check that out if you haven't. So the flash here is actually pretty good. I was worried about, especially this like face here, because of all the the wrinkles in the hair, and then obviously that spear with all the wrapping. But it scrapes off surprisingly well. It's actually pretty easy, and there isn't any hard to reach places like where she's holding her shield, which is very hard to reach. We'll get to that when I actually get to painting it. But overall, a pretty pleasant experience. Not too bad at all. So the Spearmaiden Cyclops is actually pretty interesting in game because you ignore defense die. You don't roll defense against her. So she will hit your tank just as hard as your mage, which is kind of cool. But she can't be buffed up with equipment, which is kind of interesting because she's wielding the spear and the shield and everything. And so I'd imagine she could use equipment quite well, but apparently not in the game, which is fine. So this is a skull from the Citadel Skulls pack. I did an unboxing of that as well, so if you haven't seen it, check the description for that link. I got 340 of them. They're of varying sizes. They're all like this. So I chose this because it's about the same size as an ogre. Now, I realize that, or the Cyclops. I realize that it has two eyes, and so it's not a Cyclops. But in the description, which they don't post in-game, you have to find it online, which is kind of unfortunate. I think this should be on her card or something. But it mentions that well, first of all, the females are actually larger than the males. So there is a Kickstarter exclusive Cliffbreaker Cyclops, and he is actually smaller. So they're the same height, but she is, her feet are spaced apart and she's bending much more. So she is a much bigger model. And you can kind of tell, putting them side by side, that she is a little bit bigger, but not by a whole lot either. They're both giant. Here I'm using some liquid green stuff just to fix kind of some of the mold gaps on her two arm pieces here. Pretty easy to get to here again as well with this texture tool. Not too bad, and I'll scrape it off and smooth it after it dries off camera. So right now I'm just kind of globbing it on there and more or less getting it to where I need it. But yeah, I would highly suggest doing that. If you're going to paint this, then do that. This is just to tell you that I did prime it, so now we are primed. I primed it in gray. I was just priming it in a skin color, but I'll mention more of that later. I'm piling up these rocks because the skull that I placed there is open in the back, and I can't have that. I'm going to cover up these rocks, but you could probably just keep them rocks if you wanted to. I wanted it to blend in a bit more. So with this skull, in the description it says that the females of the Cyclops act like they're protecting their young, even if they aren't conceived. And so I figured in this, she came across this big skull and it triggered her and made her upset or something like that. I don't know. It made sense to me, and it was an excuse to use the skull anyway. So here's the basic skin tone. I'm going to be covering about 2/3 of her body in this. She is pretty much all skin. She is not that covered up, except for on the side you're looking at right now. So notice she has that kind of arm, a shoulder shield, and then she's got the modified shield where she can poke her spear through, and then she also has some more armor on her leg there as it's swooshing there. So she is fully armored on one side and then completely unarmored on the back and on the other side. So I'm assuming she's really proficient with weapons. So it's it's a great sculpt, and I love the sculpt, but it's unfortunate then that her special ability in the game is she can't use any of the weapons. It seems it would have been cool if she could maybe use weapons really well instead or something like that. But I like the unique part where she's going to hit you no matter what. That works fine too, so that's okay. And, it makes sense. She's not going to be equipped with an axe when the Mini has this humongous javelin kind of ballista bolt here. So, just getting all the fingers. I'm not too worried about this, because the difference between the light gray and this light basic skin tone from Vallejo is so minimal that the paint's going to come up pretty okay either way, so I'm not too concerned about it. And this is pretty much the lightest color I'm painting as well, so everything else is going to darken it anyway. So just kind of blobbing it in there using my regiment brush. Not too bad there. Do notice that one of her breasts is exposed, minus the strap. So at first I thought that was armored as well, but it's only the other one that has kind of a breastplate or a kind of a protective cup over it. Again, she's just armored on that one side. But otherwise, getting around her hair, she has a lot of hair, by the way. So she's got like armpit hair, and she's got like thigh hair and stomach hair, and just, it's funny because the male one has barely any hair, just kind of in the back of his head. And so she's like way hairier and nasty. She's got like horns coming out of her skin and all that. I'm going to paint over all that and bring out those horns just a little bit later, actually. So I'm going to cover up like the whole foot and everything. But if you could prime in this color or in a light skin color like this, that would save you a lot of time. I only have gray. I actually have a black one as well, but it's like 5 years old, and I'm afraid if I ever used it again, it would spray really like textured and bad on the mini and ruin a mini. So I just need to throw that one away, actually. So I don't even see it, because I'm never going to use that. It's not worth the risk. Primer is one of the harder things to get off. You can pretty much correct any paint job if you're lucky enough, but primer, maybe not. That's as far as I know. So, almost wrapping up here, and we'll move on to the hair next. And that will, I apologize. No, it'll be the Seraphim Sepia. So I'm going to add a shade here real quick, just ahead of time. I'm going to highlight it way later, so she's going to look darker than she should. The reason I used a shade instead of just highlighting up is, unlike the male Cyclops, she has a lot of texture on her skin. So you'll see when I go over her hands, they're really wrinkly and nasty. And then I mentioned those horns earlier. And so she just has tons of, you see like on her face and everything, she's got tons of ridges and just nastiness everywhere. And this really helps bring that out from a table length distance. Otherwise, you can get the really gradual skin tone, and I think that's really nice normally, but I don't think it would work quite as well here. And if I tried to make it really drastic, I would have had to start with an odd dark tone anyway. And I don't know. I think this works just fine, especially for her, because she is not very much of a smooth model really anywhere. Everything's banged up. Her shields has texture. You'll see that later on too. There's pretty much texture galore on her. Okay, here's the hair. I had to go get this gray blue. I was looking for a gray blue, and Vallejo happened to have something called gray blue, and sure enough, I think it's pretty much perfect. This is going to be the base coat for all of her hair. It's kind of the inside. So the concept art is very almost cartoony, and it looks like there are two different color hairs. It's mainly just a blob with these strands highlighted. I'm going to try and do that through paint. And by doing that, I'm just going to actually use a very different blue on a dry brush later. I think it turned out pretty well, and it kind of got that effect that I wanted from the concept art. But it's not normally how you would do hair. I didn't use any shade or anything like that. So kind of an interesting take on hair, but I think it worked out well. I got a smaller brush here. I skipped a little bit of showing, this is going to be a long video anyway. So because it is a big model and there was a lot to do, lots of detail here. It pretty much, I'm painting individual strands of hair right now. So great amount of detail, and I love that they did that, but it does take a little bit longer to paint. But I got a little finer brush here just to make sure I don't blob it on. So I use the regiment brush to save a little bit of time, but you don't necessarily want to take that to the edges. Not after you've already done the skin. And you would have to be careful no matter which order you did that in. And I did not even paint those inside bits of her upper thighs with the regiment brush at all. I didn't want to stick my big brush in there, so the little one it is. So just touching that up. So yeah, I don't know. It took quite a while. Here's some burnt red. This is just for the horns on the head. I'm not going to use it anywhere else, except I'm going to water it down and make her other horns look a little bit nastier. So I've watered it down a lot, and I'm just putting it around these body horns to give it kind of a more nasty, not necessarily bloody, but just kind of a more raw, fleshy kind of protrusions there. And I'm going to put that in like her gums and stuff too, make it kind of, I'm just trying to make her as nasty as possible, because really she kind of is. But anyway, no, with this detail work like this, and her tongue as well, it takes quite some time. So here's some Baneblade Brown. I'm going to cover the whole spear on accident here, so I have notes and Trello where I kind of mark in a checklist on what everything is and what color is. And I just wrote Spear Baneblade Brown. The wrappings I listed separately because I did want them a different color. So I would suggest doing the wrappings darker. If you look at the concept art again, the wrapping is a darker brown than the spear wood itself. And the spear wood just kind of shows in between and then on the very end. So there's not a lot there. So I'll correct that later. But for now, it's all Baneblade Brown. Some violet red. This is another one I kind of had to kind of find. So the concept art's really odd because it's shaded here. But I put it next to one of the characters, Zoe, the dwarf from the main core game. Or Zoe, I apologize. I always say Zoe, but it's probably Zoe. And it's the same color, and it looks more obvious there because she has it in like light and dark. So it's kind of like it's kind of a maroon. It looks much more pink here than it does in real life. So it's a little bit darker. But again, in the concept art, it's all in shadow, but you can tell it's not silver. It's definitely not the silver of the shield and the spear tip. So I did do this. And you know what? It adds a little bit of splash of color, which is really nice because otherwise she's mostly skin. And then just details on it. And as you can see, it's kind of like a rag that's been just like stuffed in this belt. And so it's spilling down before and it's kind of like moved over her butt, like over to the side and everything. So and in fact, I keep missing bits of it. So there's a little piece above the kind of leather strap that she's going to have that I'm missing here. I'll go back and paint that later, but for now I'm thinking that's part of the leather strap itself, and it is not. So I'll have to correct that. And again, do the fine detail brush, just making sure I get all the little edges and tips and making sure that's all nice. And the inside of that kind of armor plating there, making sure that that's covered up, because you will see in there. Now inside there, you kind of have to go in there and pray. So right now I'm getting the kind of it's not a breastplate. I guess it's like one breastplate. I don't know. Her like one bikini cup. I don't know what it is. So we're getting some Rhinox hide. This is my go-to dark brown, because it's not black, but it's a really dark brown, and I like that for like these kind of like belt like structures, because I don't know. In real life, I struggle with black versus brown belts anyway, but in here, I think it fits pretty well. You don't see this in the concept art either. She's covered up mostly by her shield. And in fact, in the concept art, it almost looks like she's wearing nothing behind the shield, so they may have just added this, because I think you would be able to see where this is in the concept art, but it's not there. It said it's just skin. But either way, I'm doing that in this kind of brown, and it's a little too watered down. With these dark colors, I do like to water them down a lot, but when you're doing these fine details, it tends to pool, which is kind of unfortunate. But making sure I'm getting all the little bits and trying to avoid the metal rings there, because painting silver on top of that would be a rather burdensome task that I would rather avoid. And so just trying to do that. But, I'm really glad they added this to the model, because these kind of just color straps like this, especially this dark color, it's really the only dark color on her besides the inside of her shield. That I think it just makes it a lot more dynamic of a model to look at, which is kind of cool. And it's kind of strapped onto her bottom there, giving her that kind of shapely bottom that she has. As you can see, it's really just kind of looped really tightly down in there, and you just kind of, so in between her legs there, you really just kind of have to, you can see it, but it's hard to get your brush there because of how big her base is. Her base, by the way, is massive. I believe it is a custom size. It's just made to as big as she needs to be. It's about 80 millimeters, though. It's a little bit large. I think it's like 83 or something like that. I actually measured it because I was looking for a holder and could not find one big enough. So I'm just gonna have to hold her base, because I was worried my hand would get tired because it's so open. Luckily it didn't. I didn't go in any long enough spurts, I think, to cause that. But it's probably a worry you could have if you're just going to sit down and paint this all in one go, though that's going to take you all day. At least it took me about that long. So right around here is where I'm noticing, see, I skipped that little flap there, that is actually not part of the kind of belt, and instead, actually, so I'm going to cover that up with the violet red again, because then I noticed that. And so, you kind of get to it. So I also forgot this kind of armband here, so I went and painted that in as well. Not too bad, really, but Getting that inside. I was able to do it, and if I was able to do it, anybody can, but it is kind of hard. And don't forget the inside of her shield. So I'm going to color it in the same brown, but I'm going to lighten it up a lot during the highlight phase to really make it look a little bit more like wood. I'm not going to add a wash to it, and it ends up really, really nice. You'll see it. I'm actually pretty happy with it. A lot of my techniques are just kind of it may look nice, and sometimes it does, and I think in this time it really paid off well. But again, getting that the inside part, like the very top part between her kind of shoulder armor, and yeah, right in there, that is, be careful not to get it anywhere else. So we're getting some lead belcher. This is kind of the darker silver that I have, so it'll be kind of the base color for that, and I'll do some minimal highlighting here. But with such an angular piece, it's kind of you can treat it like a triangle, just kind of, highlight one side and call it good. You could maybe use a little bit of highlighting to add some weathering kind of look to it, but I did not. It looked like that spear is pretty well made, as opposed to the shield, which has seen better days. Speaking of which, the shield is also going to get it, but avoid that kind of insignia detail as much as possible, because that's going to be a very bright color. And again, bright color on silver is not going to be fun, so avoid that. That being said, it is raised, which I very much appreciate. I very much dislike it when they make minis that don't have it raised, because it's difficult to really get the detail right. You can see that on kind of the lily arch shield that she has, where it's just kind of a texture shown onto it. It's really difficult to paint that, so I don't really like that. And her little hairband, to be sure to get that as well. That's the only other piece of silver on her, minus the rings, which will be the next thing I get up, and the buckles, which I'm actually going to do all in one fell swoop. So be prepared for that. And see, again, it's all these little details that just, even after painting it, it's surprising me. So there's these like bolted on pieces, like that's how they attach the wood to the back, it seems, or something. I don't know what they're doing, because the wood seems fairly good there, but either way. And then she has the major hoop she sticks her arm through, though I don't know how she fits her massive fingers and hand through that. That doesn't seem to make much sense to me, but maybe it's strapped onto her and then it's permanently part of her. That wouldn't surprise me either. So this video, I don't know if you've noticed or not, is a little bit faster. I have this at ×8, I believe. So if you take the runtime of this, times it by 8, and then times it by like 2 more, because I did some off-camera highlighting and when I ever had to do layers. Be sure to use a small brush for that, so you don't get that silver on the skin. I do get it a little bit on the buckle coming up right here, and I have to touch that in right here off camera on the underside. Oh, there we go. Whoops. So again, smaller brush the better, and if you have steadier hands than me, you should be all right. But I'm trying to combine the color use as much as possible, and I do, because I keep missing details. There's so much more than you would think here. When I first looked at this model, I'm like, hey, this will be, fun. I've never done a model this big, period. And this one, it kind of like the Ogre Rockbreaker, again, with just so many little details. She's got like 8 buckles, I feel, and that's just the buckles. That's not including the horns and the armor pieces and insignias and the straps and the teeth, and there's a lot here. So it does take some time. So this video is a little bit longer, even with the speed up and some strategic editing to not show you anything twice, if I can help it. But we're in here for the long haul, and it's worth it for this nice, big, detailed miniature, I feel. So, and the camera angle's a little bit different too. So here's a Flash Glitz Yellow. I'm starting really strong here, and actually this paints up pretty well. I was surprised. This took 2 layers, so I do paint another layer afterwards. But again, when it's raised like that, you see how easy that is to paint on, and then you just kind of run your brush along the side. Now I'm gonna have to baby it a little bit, because it's just I'm not perfect. If you're better than me, you may only have to do this once, but I had to get the violet red out and touch up the side again. I was a little bit heavier on the yellow, but yeah, it's whatever. But it looks really, really cool, that pink and yellow. Definitely a unique combination. I think I just think it looks cool. But anyway, you may notice the angles difference. Well, with her, and it's not really necessarily because of her size. It partially is. I'm able to keep her in focus much easier, having it kind of at the side angle here. I apologize if that bothers you. I know sometimes it's harder to see what I'm painting. I tried to sit in a way to where I'm still kind of facing it. Again, the same yellow on the shield, by the way. So it should look pretty good for you guys, but you'll see, especially later on, some of my, a paint pot here or something like that, because it is a much wider. I'm zoomed out farther, but that spear sticking out. If I turned it how I had it before, where I'm kind of filming myself straight on, the spear would hit the camera constantly, and that is no good. I actually tried it out, just with a brush with no paint on it to see what I do, because I never pay attention to how I hold it when I'm painting it, just whatever's comfortable. But it did end up hitting the camera quite often. So a little different camera angle here too, but hopefully you guys can see that as well. Again, just making sure you get the sides. So first I get the top and then I get the sides, and kind of spin it around to make sure you do get them all. You don't want any gray showing, so it kind of looks like a solid thing there, but quite easy, which I was pretty happy with. One of the nice things is most of the details are pretty big. Deathclaw Brown. This is kind of a very tan, or a little bit of an orange brown. I really like this brown. It's very cool. I think it'd be cool in like some kind of desert animal. I don't know. It just seems deserty to me. Maybe because it's kind of like a dried clay. But I used this for her kind of leather straps on the bottom here, because the concept art shows it as a very unique kind of a brown. And this actually, I think, fits fairly close. The concept art may be a little bit more of a yellow and less of an orange. But this is as close as I could find. And heck, if I'm going to custom mix of colors like some heathen, I'm just going to buy it and use it. And I'll bring that up later. So remind me if I forget. It'll be too late for this video because I would have recorded and uploaded it. But remind me in the comments. But I'll remember. So the Deathclaw Green, again, you cannot see this in the concept art, but I wanted to add a little bit of a different color, and I'm going to paint her satchel green as well, which again, you don't see in the concept art, but it'll be a different green. So I have two different greens now too. So several browns, have that blue and that yellow is kind of a splash of color, and then two different greens, which I think add quite well. But this is just kind of like some padding there. I imagine I don't know if this would be used to absorb some shock if the shield was hit. I don't know what kind of massive thing is going to hit her enough to even hurt her. I'm not sure how we killed this thing, to be honest, in the game. I feel like even if I had an axe, I don't know how much that would do. But again, fairly easy to paint there. Not too bad. So I'm painting those gums. I'd forgotten to do that. Here's some Castellan Green. This is a much darker green. I'm going to paint the kind of sack or satchel, or that's not a satchel. It's just a sack. I don't know. Maybe she plays marbles. And that's her like marble sack with her favorite marbles in there. But I'm going to paint that green. Again, just trying to add another color, but something believable. I think she could find a green sack that she might like. And it's kind of looped in and then spilled over, so you can't see the belt at all. Some Screaming Skull, my go-to bone color for skulls. Kind of like the color you would get if you in a science room, right? Those kind of like fake bones, the bones that have been dead for a long time. So here's some Cadian Fleshtone. I'm painting her nails, two different colors. And so, because if you look on the concept art, they are a much different color. They're the same color as pretty much her teeth and her eye. And her eye doesn't have a pupil. So I'm not going to give her one either. And I think it actually works. I was really worried that I might have to go on a limb here and do something different than the concept art, but I think it works out okay. So anyway, I'm going to put the Castellan, or Cadian Fleshtone, I apologize, on her teeth and all of her fingernails here. And this will be kind of the base coat. They're really nasty. I don't think she cleans them that often, but, and again, it won't be as stark of a difference because I will end up lightening up her skin again. Here's some Steel Legion Drab. Here's me fixing that spear. So I'm going to make that correct here. So it is a little bit of a darker brown, but not too much. It's a fairly muted brown even in the concept art. And I feel Steel Legion Drab is kind of a very neutral drown. It's not there to offend anyone, I feel. And then I'm going to touch up the spear points, so I'm painting kind of in between there with that Baneblade Brown again, and bringing in those sides, just trying to make it seem a little bit different. But I think it looks nice. And again, painting under there, not too bad. So there's the eye, and finally decided to do that. Now this is the teeth, and I had missed her tongue kind of curls up, and I thought it was a tooth, so I corrected that here. So I'm painting kind of the inside. Her teeth are going out; they're kind of jutted out, so it's really easy to get front and back there, which is kind of nice. And adding a little bit of highlighting there with that screaming skull. And now I'm going to bring that screaming skull into these horns here, so you can kind of see. Well, I say horns, but I'm painting them almost like they're pretty much bone protrusions of some kind. And so just kind of painting the tips of them, and I don't have a lot of paint on my brush, so it blends pretty well. It's not actually too drastic, but I did kind of want them to pop, and I think surrounding them with that kind of red nastiness helps too. And then there's the highlight on her teeth with that same screaming skull. Some Agrax Earthshade. This is what I'm going to put on the bone skull here. Again, it's mainly there just to go into the in between the brows and in the sockets there to really add that depth. And I'm going to cover her spear with that as well, and then I'll bring it back up because the browns on there are still so close that they look fairly similar. I'm also going to paint, I'm going to put on these. I'm going to keep them this color though. Again, like I said, it looked more like a kind of a yellowish, darker color in the concept art, so that's a good color here. Here's that screaming skull. This is the other color I'm putting it just kind of on the tips of her fingernails, to kind of give it a little bit of depth, make it look darker kind of near where it meets the skin. That has a name, I don't know it. So, but I know it does. My wife would know it. Here's me bringing back that skull. I probably watered this down a bit too much again. Notice this is the second time I said that. I might be a little too safe with my watered downness, but it just meant I had to add a whole bunch of layers. And I'm going to already highlight that Castellan Green satchel. This is just the Castellan Green with a little bit of white. I'll actually give it 2 highlights here. And then I'm going to, on that second highlight, I'm going to be much too heavy with it. And so I'm going to hate it and try and water it down while it's still wet and spread it around. I'm going to give up on that. So here's that second one that's way too bright and much too, sharp and obvious. And so then I'm going to fix it off camera, back to that first level. So here's that Kantor Blue. This is the only time I'm dry brushing on this mini. So again, it's a much different blue. If you recall me saying earlier that it's kind of, the concept art shows just kind of particular strands as a much lighter color. And so what I decided to do here is just make it to where it looks like it's, I don't really know how to explain it. So the shine is kind of the other color, and then otherwise it's muted. But I was able to, there isn't a spot that's small enough on her that I couldn't dry brush this on. I could actually get, I know all the angles are good, and there's not any small strands, even like around her neck, I was able to do without incident, which I was pretty happy about. That was probably the only part I was worried about. But this part, yeah, it's pretty easy. And it's a fairly heavy dry brush. I'm trying to make that blue the color of the hair, and then just the recesses the lighter. It's kind of opposite of what you would normally do, I feel, right? Normally you have the darker colors inside and you highlight higher. But I don't know. I like it. Let me know if you don't. It's probably the one thing I wasn't sure about how to accomplish well. And here I am. I've just watered down some of the blue, and there is very little paint in here. And this is, I wouldn't even count it as a shade. It's just there to slightly thin the dry brush ever so slightly to make it not quite as drastic. And perhaps this is me just course correcting slightly. So here's me using some Stormhost. Notice I did this before using a known oil shade. I wanted to try and do a very hinted at highlight as opposed to a drastic highlight. So now I'm adding the Nuln Oil on top of the highlight, which I think will kind of blend it in there. Just for the spear tip and the headband, the shield I'm going to do opposite, because it looks really shiny in the concept art. So wanted it to be a little bit more shiny than maybe the spear tip already is, which I feel quite is because it's so flat. But you can see those textures really pop out in that Nuln Oil. I would highly suggest adding a shade to that shield because it has little tiny cracks all throughout it that are really pop with that Nuln Oil shade. And again, you're just adding it to the lead belcher, which is already kind of a darker silver, so I think it ends up quite well. I'm taking a little bit of Stormhost Silver, very watered down, and adding a little daub on all the little metal trinkets there that's in the concept art as well. But I just wanted a hint of shininess. I didn't want to look necessarily that silver, and instead just kind of give a hint there. So I decided to end up bringing that Stormhost Silver back up on that. My original idea was to try and do the be smart and do the Nuln Oil later. I didn't think it really added much to it. So I went and brought that back up, and I'm going to put that just kind of haphazardly around the shield. It is so watered down. That's his Nuln Oil as well, on the arm rest, or I don't know, the cushion there, whatever that is, and me adding another layer to that skull. All right, this is Dorn Yellow. Remember I said to remind me, so hopefully you reminded me, if you thought I hadn't gone to it. This is an edge color, and my understanding of the edge colors for Citadel is it's just one of their base colors, and then they added white to it. And a lot of, fancy painters scoff at this because they're like, I can mix my own white, I don't need your help. Well, I think it's darn convenient, and I bought it, and I think it turned out really well. So, I am not too proud. Here is me highlighting it back up. This is not white, this is just a basic skin tone again. I didn't add any white to it. I'm just trying to bring it back, though it is really watered down. So you can still see through it. It's not the color it was before. But as you can see, do you see the detail now? Just in that knee joint with all the little like pops and kind of nastiness and the texture there. So that's really nice. It's not just for the kind of muscle tone. If it was just muscle tone, I would have just highlighted it straight up. I would have felt pretty comfortable doing that at this point. But that texture, I really wanted to pop. And so I'm pretty much, I have it very watered down. And while I'm not rubbing this on a paper towel at all, I'm essentially dry brushing this on with a tiny brush, right? So I'm just kind of lightly painting over it and just trying to get in there. And I'm not going to get all the way at the very edges, so I'm going to keep those edges as dark as possible. But the texture there, I'm just rubbing it over. I'm not jabbing my paint in there at all. So you can see, like on the toes, I'm just running it across, counter to it. Kind of like you would a dry brush, right? Just trying to get the base color up. I'm going to skip around here. I'm not going to show you the entire thing. So this will kind of be the last section, but I'm going to bring this essentially from the bottom to the top. And it'll take 3 coats. I believe I ended up with 3 different coats of this, to get it a more of a solid color, that you couldn't see through. So I've now skipped to my second coat. And as you can see, my second coat, I'm being slightly more careful, though still not, completely, fine-tuned here. I'm just trying to get the basic shapes of it out now, as opposed to trying to cover, 90% of the skin here. And so this is just kind of an example. I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but just kind of how I'm picking out the muscles at this point, and kind of the higher raised textures. As you can see now, I'm finished, and this Emperor's Children is mixed about 10%. It's about a 1 to 4 parts with the basic skin tone. And I'm adding that to her little like pimples, like you can see on her butt, and there's one on her breast, and I think on her back there's some there. Just giving them a little bit of a kind of a nasty pinkish, sickly kind of color. And here is this is some white mixed in here. I didn't add a shade, so this is my first of 2 highlights on this red-violet color. And I'm actually really happy with the highlighting I did here. I'm actually pretty proud of the bottom part, the shield part. This part, not quite as much. I needed to add some kind of highlighting because it is supposed to be a kind of a metal. So I noticed I added a little bit in the middle there. Here's that second highlight. And this is, again, about, so now we have 2 drops of white in here. So about as much difference. That's the first one. I pretty much doubled it, right? And as you can see, they're a little heavy. I had to kind of baby this off camera a little bit with some watered down paints and kind of undoing what I had done on that. But you get the idea. And then again, don't forget her breast covering there. Now, this is some Rhinox hide that I'm just bringing back out. This has a little bit of white into it, but this is, again, like almost a 1 in 4. Very little white. I'm just kind of adding it to the edges here, and it really, really helps define this wrapping. I would highly suggest doing this as well. It's really easy to do because you're just bringing your brush, kind of back and forth. And here's me bringing back the Baneblade Brown from the shade. And Astrogranite Debris. So skip the first half. I'm going to show you the second half here. Even though I'm going to skip around a little bit. This base is huge. I used so much of this, Astrogranite Debris. It was about $4 worth of Astrogranite Debris alone, not including the skull and the rocks I had in here too. This is kind of an expensive base. It's huge. And I even made it thinner than I normally do. So here I'm covering up the skull. Like I said, I did that. You probably don't have to, but I thought it looked kind of cool. And instead of gluing it, I quickly added these and then let it dry in it. So far, it's held up fine. I've kind of tossed it down and tapped it, and it seems to be holding. So fingers crossed on that. I'm trying to be lazy here and not glue if I don't have to. Here I'm adding the Steel Legion Drab onto the pebbles here. This is after it's dried. As you can see, I'm actually touching the base fine. I'm not like leaving fingerprints or anything like that. And this was actually not too bad. I could just hold her and kind of get the sides there. And the dry brush of Administratum Gray. This is to bring out that texture. And I bring it over the kind of rocks there as well. It kind of helped ties them up. And then it's kind of a free highlighting on my part. You could probably highlight them. Maybe that'd look a little bit better. I don't know. This is much quicker and looks pretty good in my eyes anyway. And as always, my roaming monsters of Massive Darkness are surrounded by Gehenna's gold. Just to, so like you couldn't know already on this one that this is some roaming monster. I mean, she is definitely not a hero unit, though that would be amazing, but she makes little Ned really look little. Again, remember I was going to bring this up. So this is that last highlight of Rhinox hide, but much stronger on the brush. So this is the Rhinox hide with some white. And I'm just kind of highlighting the end there with the side of my brush, getting about what, 70%, 80% of the wood on the back there. And then on both sides of the belts, I'm going to highlight those as well. Just kind of haphazardly, pretty quickly. I'm fine with it looking a bit rough. I think that actually looks kind of nice because it doesn't look perfect, except for that was too much. So that was some regular Rhinox hide, kind of watered down and added in the middle there. There's a showing that I did a matte varnish on it. So we are now done with the matte varnish. And afterwards, I want the metal parts, the shield and the armor and the spear to be a little bit shiny. So I'm brushing on some gloss coat, some Tester's gloss coat here. They make a nice brush on. That's really nice. And you can use this in the winter inside. I've been tempted to get their dull coat as well and just brush coat the entire model. But so far, my garage is staying warm enough to where I can bring the model out really quickly and then spray it and then bring it back inside really quickly so it doesn't get too cold or anything like that. It dries pretty okay. Be sure to get the little metal bits. I didn't worry about the buckles. Those are far too small. And again, I'm going to loop around the base and make that a little bit shiny as well. A dull-coated gold looks odd to me. And there is the finished mini. Guys, let me know what you think. I've never painted anything this detailed or this big before, and I'm so excited. I was so worried I would ruin it. And I think I did far from ruin it. Actually, I think she looks pretty boss. I think she looks great. I can't wait to fight her now. Like, I might load my cards just so I can, oh, look, she spawned. Who would have thought? Anyway, Let me know in the comments below what you think of, this mini, whether how big it is or the details or my paint job or whatever. Guys, thanks so much for watching this. If you made it all the way, 40 minutes of this, thank you so much. I hope it was entertaining. Hope it was educational. Please like the video if you did enjoy it. I always appreciate that. Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe if you want to see more. I'm going to continue to paint Massive Darkness. And this was just, the first of many. Next will be some heroes, so that'll be a change for me, so look forward to that. Again, if you are interested in actually supporting the channel, you can check me out on Patreon for only $1 a month. That's $12 a year. You can see some kind of tidbits, some teases, and behind the scenes. I posted some work in progress of these as I went through it. Posted all the paints that I used there and kind of teased that a bit. Anyway, guys, thanks so much. I always appreciate it, and I'll talk to you guys again next time.